Cool. Hi, Asher, is there any intro? Should just dive in and go.
I can give an intro. So, hey everyone, thanks for making it out today. I'm really excited to introduce Emily Woods, a Forbes 30 under 30 list member who's pioneered a really innovative way to cellularly treat waste. And she's implemented that across the world. And it's really exciting and a ton of fun. I'm really excited to hear from her today.
Cool. I'm pumped to talk to you guys. EWB got a lot of my start of everything in my life. And so I'll talk a little bit today. Today we'll talk about like three things: a little bit of my journey, how I got to working with poop in Kenya, a little bit about my company and what we do there in Kenya. And where I really want to talk about today is EWB and some of the things that I found from my experience as I learned a lot more about international development. And I guess I called today improving the world one poop at a time. So debating the impacts of international development. This is a constant struggle in my life, is what is the role as an American in our work in improving something like sanitation in Kenya. And I think it has direct impacts to those of you who are involved in EWB there at Georgia Tech. And some of it was my master's, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is a real passion of mine of how do we help development around the world rather than hinder it and cause more problems. So I'll dive into a lot of it today. I'll share hopefully some fun stories and some fun pictures, and we'll have time for questions about all of it. So let's dive in, stay on with me. I think a great place to start is just kind of how I got into EWB. So I studied mechanical engineering at Georgia Tech, started in 2005. After my sophomore year of Georgia Tech, I actually took a year off, so in between my second and third year. And I went and worked in the engine room of a ship called Logos Hope and kind of traveled around the world. And literally my job was like get in tiny places because I was the smallest one in the engine room. So I worked inside of a 9,000 horsepower diesel engine, which was pretty cool. Felt very Magic School Bus-esque. But while I was doing that, I got to learn a lot more about water and sanitation because it's big problems on a boat, and I did lots of work on it. And I also met a lot more people from other areas around the world. And I think I got a huge passion, even though I was studying mechanical engineering, I got a big passion for water and sanitation when I was still there on the ship. So much so that when I came back to Georgia Tech after my year working abroad, I wanted to dive into EWB. It was one of the ways that I really wanted to expand on this and continue working. I think when I was on the ship, I realized that I just had this passion for wanting to travel. And I kind of knew that my whole life. My whole life, I had wanted to go in Africa. My mom tells a story of me looking at National Geographics when I was like 5 and seeing huts and being like, this is cool. I want to live in here someday. And my mom being all like, oh, that's nice. You know, that's sweet, honey. You'll grow out of that. Never grew out of it. I've always interest. So I was pumped when I joined EWB in 2009. We were just starting this project in Cameroon, and I was actually accepted to go on the very first trip to Cameroon. So it was going to be my first time in Africa, and I was so excited. It was just like a dream come true. And I don't know if they still tell this story, but it was kind of a horror story for Georgia Tech international travel in general. So it was 4 students and 1 professor, none of us who had really traveled to Africa before. And on our flight out of Atlanta, we were delayed. And so they rerouted us even before we landed in France and had us go through Benin. And so we landed, and I don't want to spend forever on the story, but it's a good one. So we landed in Benin at like midnight. And that was just chaos in itself. And we didn't know if our bags would be there or what, but it's this very small airport, and we're walking around this airport at midnight, no bags. So we just have our carry-ons. None of our other bags came through. And we're like looking for this other flight because there's supposed to be a connection to Cameroon. And when we tell people that, they laughed. And they're like, what do you mean connection flight? Like, there has been a strike on top of a fuel shortage. No flight has left Cameroon in 4 days. So they just kind of like laughed at us. Mind you, they only speak French. None of us spoke French because we were going to the English part of Cameroon. And then we had this like tough policeman who was like, oh, you don't have visas to Benin. And so he forced us all to pay about $250 cash, each of us, to get an emergency visa to Benin. Then we had to find a hotel. And so we like found this hotel. None of us knew what was going on. It was all in French. We ended up being stuck in Benin for 3 days with no luggage, going to the Air France office every day, trying to figure out how to get out of Benin and into Cameroon, with such suggestions like taking a bus through Nigeria, which like would have been a horrible idea. And there's just it was bad. And then it got even worse when somehow our EWB partner in Cameroon somehow got access to the entire EWB listserv, including like the dean of students, including all of our parents, including everyone, and just sent this really weird message that was like, hey, has anyone seen the team? They haven't showed up, and that was supposed to be here 2 days ago. So suddenly there was this like red alert across like the whole university that there were law students and professors. It was crazy. This was like before phones really, and so we had to get this like satellite phone and had to do damage control and let people know we're fine, we're just stuck in Benin. Anyway, finally get to Cameroon. Out of all of our luggage, apparently 2 bags had shown up, one of the girls' bag and one of the guys' bag, and none of our equipment. And so that's what we had to live on the rest of the trip. Lo and behold, our partner from this village had just been coming to the airport every day and waiting for us, which in itself is crazy. He picked us up. I remember it being so hot. This is in the capital of Cameroon. It was so hot. And so we were just downing water, and I had like 3 liters of water. And then we had tickets for just this night bus. And if any of you know anything about public transportation in Africa, it is an adventure. And that is what we did in this first trip. I think EWB Georgia Tech has learned a lot since then. But we boarded this like public transport bus at midnight. There were 3 times as many people as there were seats. It was so hot, and you couldn't keep the window open because people think that cold air is going to make them sick. And so you had to trap in all that like smell and heat, and someone vomited on the bus. And then I had to pee really bad, and I was just miserable and I couldn't sleep. And I remember at one point, could you not, this like live head of a pig flipped down off the roof in the window right next to me and looked at me. And I was like looking at the eye of the pig, and I was just like, I have wanted to come to Africa my whole life, and I have never been more miserable. And I was like, I literally started rethinking my whole life. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't for me. Then this is a picture of us actually in the hotel in Benin, and you can see like, well, like literally whatever we're wearing, whatever we have for 3 days. We were very nasty and gross. But that was horrible bus ride. It was 8 hours. But as sunrise, we're like coming into the nearby city of Bamenda, and it was sunrise in the valley, but we're up higher, and so it was much cooler and it was beautiful. And I was like, oh, it's kind of nice. Then we got in a taxi, and the taxi like pulled us even out of that city, and it got prettier and prettier the more rural we got. And then as we pull into the village of Manguaga ended up being just the most incredible place in the world. It was up in the mountains. The people were amazing. It was great temperatures and great people. And I loved every minute of us. And this is a picture at the end of our trip. And just like by the end of it, I was just so obsessed and in love with everything in Africa that it put the whole bus trip away. I've learned a lot since then. Needless to say, there wasn't too much we could do on that first trip without many things, but we made a lot of good relationships, and we started it. A little bit just about the project in Manguaga, because this would have been a few years ago, and I don't know if the EWB team talks about it all. So this is a picture of Cameroon. If you don't know where it is, they're in West Africa. Cameroon is divided into both a French-speaking and English-speaking provinces, and so we are in the northwest province of Bamenda, which is an English-speaking area, and you can see that it's surrounded by not so many safe areas and lots of social issues in the area. This was a map that we made after our first trip. Really good map, right? But the whole village is on the edge of a mountain, so it's pretty steep. And what you can see here, those X's are the different distribution lines that they have. And they had these 2 different spring boxes that were basically catching in underground water in those 2 different areas. And then you can follow those the pipelines of those black lines there, and the numbers that you see, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the different standpipes. So just places where you can go and collect water. And so there was local water provided at the time by the local utility called SNEC, but it was very, very expensive. And so I think all of 5 households in the whole community could afford that water at the time. And so almost everyone was either going to these standpipes to collect water. But one of the problems was because it's on a big steep, the whole top area, including the church, and this area there's no way water can run uphill. And so they had to walk really, really far to get water. And it also just wasn't enough in a lot of the dry seasons. It wasn't very much. And so these were some of the big issues that we had. This is a cute picture of one of the kids going to collect water every morning, which was the first time for me to see this. And it was a big deal. And, you know, my 2 years, this would have been my junior, senior year there at Georgia Tech, you know, we worked on finding someone to dig a bore well in the area, and they went out and dug a well, and we were designing the distribution centers, like how those lines would run. And it was all really, really exciting. And then I graduated and the project kept going, as the EWB does. And so back there at Tech, so I was studying mechanical engineering. I did the design for the other 90%, which I'm not sure if it still runs with Dr. Colton, but just an interdisciplinary program that was really cool. And kind of the whole idea is that 90% of the world's engineering goes to 10% of the world's population. And that just like blew my mind and further like cemented the fact that I knew I wanted to use my engineering for designing for that other 90% of the world. I started doing research with Georgia Tech Research Institute. We were doing water treatment systems. And so we actually evaluated a bunch of systems that ended up being deployed in Haiti after the earthquake, which was really cool. Ended up doing my first work on waste treatment, on human shit treatment. And that was amazing. And so after I graduated, we actually took that technology of this waste treatment idea that I was doing at Georgia Tech, and applied for this program called Startup Chile. I never thought I was going to start my own company. That was never in the books. And a friend of mine that I did EWB with, Chris Quintero, invited me to a bar one night with a couple of other of us that had EWB work together, and was like, hey, there's this cool opportunity called Startup Chile where you can apply with an idea for a company and they'll pay you money to move to Chile and give it a try. And so we said, okay, why not? And so we took this idea of solar treating human waste and started this company called Sanivation down in Chile. We're just prototyping, and you can see some of our original designs there on the far right. And I have to say my time in Chile was a blast. We were down there for about 10 months. And yes, prototyping some ideas, but also just having a really good time. It was great. And while we were there, what you see there on the far right is our basic concept. So the reality is that human waste is difficult to treat. One of the most fickle things, it's difficult, and when it's not treated, it ends up in water or in the environment or on children's hands and gets a lot of people sick. Waste treatment is very expensive and takes a lot of infrastructure and current methods. And so what we designed here was, well, let's just use the sun, right? If you heat up anything hot enough, long enough, it will pasteurize it, right? It'll completely decontaminate it. And so we designed this basic mirror system of shit and black metal buckets on a focal point, and proved that within a couple hours we could treat human waste, and you could do that consistently for a community of 250 people for less than $100, and it would last for 5 years. And we thought we solved the world's problem, guys. We were so pumped. We're like, here we are. We solved the world's sanitation crisis. It's done. You know, we created this technology. And I think that was the beginning of learning a lot about, okay, how do you scale it? Okay, what about the legality and the way it works around? How about actually operating this? Who's going to pay to operate it? Who's going to pay for this? And that there's so many other issues outside of the technology. And I think that's hard for a lot of engineers to understand. And that really hit home when I thought we had solved the world's crisis. And then when we tried to actually implement this idea, we realized we had so long to go. And so we moved from Chile to Kenya, because Chile doesn't actually have the worst sanitation problem. We actually have high access to sanitation. And we moved to Chile. I went there in 2012, and actually first took a consulting job with a nonprofit called Water and Sanitation for Urban Poor. And I was brought out as a sanitation consultant for like a 4-month consultancy, and that originally brought me to Kenya. And this nonprofit had funding to build 9,000 new pit latrines around Lake Naivasha, which is where I still live now. And what I found when I was doing that analysis is that building new pits wouldn't be a long-term solution. because there's no way to empty the pits. And even if they are emptied, the wastewater treatment plant in the area is at 240% capacity. So not a bit of the waste that even gets there gets treated before it's all just dumped in the lake anyway. And so there was a much bigger problem at hand that just building pits wasn't going to solve. And I raised this to this nonprofit I was working with, and they were like, "You're right. We agree. We should apply for money to fix that problem. But first, we have to go ahead and finish up this project because that's our current project." And that really irked me. And that's a lot of the problems you'll hear with the nonprofit model, is that oftentimes you're beholden to these funders who are thousands of miles away, and don't necessarily have the flexibility to allow you to pivot and follow the needs as you learn and grow. And so when we were starting Sanivation, we did a lot of analysis on like what kind of structure you want your company to be in. And this is a really cool, easy framework to think about it, which is on the far right side, you have your traditional businesses, which they're all about financial returns, right? This is your standard Starbucks. We just want the money. That's what we're about. And on the far left, you have your really standard nonprofits, which we are 100% about the social returns, these impact focused. But there's not just two options, there's actually a range of options in between, right? You've got businesses that, yes, we're about financial returns, but we also focus a lot on our CSR, right? And having some of these impacts while we head towards that financial. And you do actually have these nonprofits that do actually try and make an income to have operational sustainability. And then right smack in the middle is you have something called a social enterprise. And you probably heard that term, but maybe didn't know what it was. A social enterprise cares equally for the financial returns, right? And for gaining money for its investors as it does for the impacts to the community. And this is what my company, Sanivation, is, a social enterprise. So we care just as much about the impacts of stopping kids from dying from diarrheal disease as we do about raising a Series A and returning that investment for our investors. And I think that's really important because our day-to-day operations in Kenya, because we're a for-profit model, forces us to follow where the market goes, forces us at the moment that we're not actually doing something of value in Kenya, we're going to go under. And I really like that. So that's just a little side lesson. I'm going to give you a little bit of pitch about Sanivation and what it is that we do. And so these are kind of our official company slides. And what we do is we're focused on transforming cities through sanitation. The reality is that you cannot have a sustainable large city if you don't have the sanitation figured out. And that seems like a basic logical step, but that is not something most cities around the world adhere to. Poop is oftentimes a out of sight, out of mind problem that once you flush, you never want to think about again. And so I always like to start that and ask, do you guys ever think about what happens after you flush your poop away? A little bit, right? Maybe some of you are actually civil engineers and you're studying this, which means you're thinking about it a lot more than the average person, right? But in general, most people just trust it, right? You just flush it and walk away. But that's not really the case. Maybe if you guys want to hear a little bit more, I have a passion also against flush-based sanitation systems and sewage. I think what we do in America is the most inefficient, silly thing in the world, but that's another talk for another day. The reality is that system of just being able to flush and not think about it doesn't really exist, right? Sewer-based systems require incredible amounts of water, incredible amounts of infrastructure, money to run that, to maintain that, the understanding and capacity to be able to keep up with it. And so throughout East Africa, 90% of human shit is not treated before it's dumped in the environment. 90%, right? And this obviously has consequences, right? So the human waste that we excrete every day has pathogens in it. And those pathogens create diarrheal disease when that ends up in food and water or on kids' hands, right? It is still the second leading cause of death for kids under 5 in East Africa. I'm gonna say that again. Human waste, something we figured out 200 years ago, how to take care of and not get diarrheal disease, is still the second leading cause of death for kids under 5. And that was crazy for me to learn growing up in the States. beyond that, just you can imagine the amount of pollution. You kind of see this picture in the background here of this is really what happens. You get these big old exhauster trucks that just dump in these lagoons, and it's just that pollution is unbelievable. And then the other thing is it really does restrict economic growth, whether it's because cities can't grow to a certain capacity, whether it's because people are always getting sick, whether it's because you're polluting all your land. The reality is that no country has reached high income status without first getting a sound sanitation system for the majority of their population. And that's just the reality. It is stifling growth. And so throughout Africa, you guys probably know this, urbanization is the fastest of the world, right? There's over 7,000 urban areas. Almost all of those lack appropriate waste management infrastructure, which is mind-blowing. By 2050, they're expecting 950 million people to be living in cities in Africa. So it is a growing problem. And then another key learning that's been coming out recently is the greenhouse gas problem. In Kampala, they just did a study that showed 75% of Kampala, that's in Uganda's entire greenhouse gas emissions were caused by unsafe sanitation management. 75% of their greenhouse gases, mainly because waste, both human waste and municipal waste, was just breaking down and creating that methane. And so it's a huge climate change issue as well. And so there's this huge need to fix the waste management infrastructure. And so what Sanivation does is we're trying to help two major groups in this big problem. On one side, here in Kenya, we've got these water utilities. So these water utilities, just like in the States, they're in charge of not only providing water, but taking that water away. And they're now actually in charge of providing a more holistic sanitation approach to even households who aren't on sewage. And that's difficult for them. They don't know how to do it. There's not clear business models. It's never been their mandate before. And so there's a lot of gaps happening. On the other side, you've got these national funders, right? These international groups like the UN saying like, this needs to happen. The African Development Bank saying, here's some money, make it happen, right? It's not for lack of money in a lot of these places, but because these water utilities don't know how to structure these projects or do it well, these funding and national governments aren't seeing progress in the way that they want. So my company, Sanivation, what we really do is we like to come in that in between. We do capacity development with these local utilities to help them design business models that'll be sustainable. We do master planning, which is like a 30-year plan of how we're going to get this city from 0% safely managed sanitation to like 80%. And this is how much money we need, and this is where it's going to go. We actually do a lot of waste collection, whether that's exhauster trucks or container-based sanitation. We do a little bit of sewage. We focus a lot on treatment plants, which I'll talk about here in a second. And we're also starting to do more municipal solid waste, as that is a big problem. Hey, Asher, I see that there's remaining time on the meeting. Is that something we should be worried about, that we're all going to be kicked off?
As well, in the event that occurs, I'll start a Blue Jeans meeting and then send a link to the chapter. That way everyone can join as well, if that works.
So
Perfect.
Yeah.
I was not aware that there's a time limit. Yes, I'd appreciate that, Talia.
So she can send that out. Just send it over to me too, or something. That'll be great. We'll keep going until then. This will be fun. So we're growing, right? Lots of fun things are happening. So we're actually operating in 9 cities now in East Africa, which is really, really exciting. We are, wow, about 20,000 is quite old. We're about 50,000 people right now with safely managed sanitation, which is exciting. We have over 150 jobs created. We have over 10,000 tons of CO2 that we're offsetting, and now have close to 6 million revenue to date, which is really exciting. So the company's taking off. There's definitely a need, and we're like feeling that need, which is exciting and really what I want to prove. How we do that is we really focus on the partnerships. And so we partner with local governments to help them figure this out. And so people really like that. And when we do that, we see them as these returning customers where we have a lot of these different services we offer them. And so as we kind of mentioned, there's that master planning, the waste to value treatment plants we'll talk about in a second, waste collection, and municipal solid waste. So our treatment plants, these are what people tend to focus on because they're like exciting and tangible, I think. So sewage has a really clear business model. It says people are almost always willing to pay for piped water to their house. So it says if you pay for piped water, you know what, I will measure how much water I'm giving you, and then I will charge you a certain percentage of that to also take that water away from you, and that will help pay for the treatment. non-sewered sanitation doesn't necessarily have as clear a business model, right? A lot of these households can barely pay for, say, an exhaustor truck to come and empty their pit latrine, much less be able to pay for that to be treated. And so who's paying for that treatment side? And so what we do is we focus on these waste to value treatment plants so that there's actually an incentive and a revenue-based model. So we take in that human waste and we convert it into solid briquettes, which you kind of see in people's hands there. And this is an industrial fuel that directly replaces firewood, say in tea plantations, or we work with edible oils and pharmaceutical companies. And so this fuel made from human waste you now sell, and by selling that, you're now using that revenue to be able to pay for the operations of the plant. And so these plants cost anywhere from $4 to $7 million to build, but then you create something that has over 1.5 million in revenue per year with a profit margin of about 15%, which means the incentives are in the right place to collect more waste, to treat more waste so I can make more money. And I think that's really important. So we've got a couple of these plants up and running, and that before we lose ourselves. And so this has been really exciting. We're continuing to grow these. We have a new $7 million plant that's starting construction in one city. We have another smaller one being started construction in another city in a couple of months up in the refugee camp, and then an expansion of our current plant in Naivasha to be started in the next few months. So it's been exciting in the post-COVID, things are really taking off, and we expect to see a lot of growth. I want to switch a little bit now to after. So I'd been working in Kenya since 2011 with sanitation, learning a lot about international development. And then I went to actually do my master's at Berkeley. And so it was really cool after living and working international development to actually now go and study it. And so while I was studying it, it was really cool to learn the theory behind a lot of what I was doing and how to continue to do better with it. And at the same time, the EWB Georgia Tech Cameroon project had stalled. There was a huge security crisis in Cameroon at the time with Boko Haram, you guys might have known. And so for 2 years, no students could travel to go and finish the project. And there was only a little bit left to be done. And so they actually reached out to old students who had traveled, as well as professional EWB members to say, hey, Georgia Tech students are not legally allowed to travel. The school will not let us go. Can you go for us? Can you help finish up this project so it's not just hanging? And of course I said yes, chance to go back to Cameroon. 6 years after I'd been, I was pumped to go back and see these people and volunteered immediately. And it was really interesting because I ended up making my whole thesis while at Berkeley around a case study of this EWB project. Because what I had realized is that what I had started in undergrad, now everything I had learned from doing international development full time for so many years, as well as now studying it in my master's, that there were a lot of things that didn't sit right with me. I felt like we were causing a lot of trouble and maybe not approaching it the best way. And so I did my whole master's around how can we do this better? And that is what I'm really, really excited to share with you guys about a little bit of that analysis I did and a little of those conclusions and continuing to improve the EWB experience and impact at Georgia Tech. And so before I dive into that, might be a really good time for us all to switch over to Blue Jeans. Asher, is that good? You're on mute with me.
My bad. It sounds perfect to me. Let's go ahead and do that real quickly. Sorry again about the Zoom meeting, having a time limit.
No worries. All right, guys. See you there.